We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello, I'm Paul Hutchin, political editor of the Daily Record. Welcome to a special by-election edition of Planet Holyrood. The Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election takes place on June the 5th. There are 10 candidates. One of the candidates is Katy Loudon, who's standing for the SNP, and she's agreed to be interviewed for Planet Holyrood today. So, Katy, thanks for joining us on Planet Holyrood. Before I get onto some of the big issues in the by-election, I just want to go back to the vote in Parliament on Tuesday on assisted dying. I don't know if you watched it, but there were some very powerful, emotive contributions. If you'd been an MSP on Tuesday, how would you have voted on that one?
Yeah, so it was an extremely powerful and extremely emotive debate, and I did watch it. I have been contacted by a number of people across the constituency on my views so far as well. Had I been in Parliament on Tuesday, I think it is the right thing to do to have further discussion. It's always been my view that it's not a simple yes or no answer. I think fantastic work has been done through the committee stages in the Parliament so far, and it was Parliament at its best, as you could see when people were having that discussion the other day. I think it's right now that there's further scrutiny. There's important amendments which need to be put in place, and that discussion needs to be had. So I would have voted for the bill as it was on Tuesday at stage one, so that those discussions and that conversation can be aired. It's been a fantastic example of really thorough public consultation. There's been a high degree of engagement, not only within this constituency but across Scotland, and it's been really important, an important part of the process.
So you would have voted for the general principles of the bill at stage one. Do you need further reassurances, stage two, for them to vote for it at stage three, or are you content just now? Do you think you would be likely to vote for it?
No, I would need further reassurances, and I wouldn't be making that decision without having, in the same way I'm a councillor just now, and when important issues face us. And you have to take part in that debate. You have to listen to all sides of the argument and learn from your colleagues and their experiences and their constituents and the stakeholders that have taken time to share their views with the committee and with the public consultation so far. So absolutely, I would want to be having those discussions.
Just on the by-election, do you see it as a two-horse race between the SNP and Labour, or is it now a three-horse race with Reform as well?
Yeah. Listen, I'm very much concentrating on my own campaign here. What I can tell you from the doors and from speaking to people, and we've been doing an awful lot of that over the past few weeks and we'll be continuing to do so, is that people are feeling extremely let down by Labour. And there's sort of two strands to that at the moment. There's at the local level and there's at the UK level. So on the local level, where we've got a Labour administration currently within South Lanarkshire who are making extremely unpopular decisions which are contrary to the, in some cases, not particularly wonderful level of public consultation that they have put in place. So that's on decisions like the £45 charge for burgundy bin collection, extremely unpopular. A lot of people are angry about that because it's happening at the same time that they've taken away free bulk uplifts for people to get rid of waste. So people have real concerns about what that actually means and the cumulative effect of that, not only in people's pockets, but also on the state of South Lanarkshire, the state of this constituency. Is it going to lead to excess fly tipping and so on? So that's very much at the forefront of people's minds, as is their recent decision, which I'm pleased to say I voted against, as I voted against the bin cuts, as did the bin charges, as did my whole group, on the removal of school buses from 8,000 pupils in South Lanarkshire, which is kicking in August. We have been really struggling to find information about how many people that's going to affect. It's come in dribs and drabs. They have not been upfront with the public on that. So that is very much in people's minds, just the decisions that Labour have taken at this level in this constituency, and also, of course, nationally. Now, I know that you've done some fantastic work yourself in highlighting some of the issues and the decisions that the UK government have taken since they've come into power, from removing the winter fuel payment, which is affecting thousands of people in this constituency, from essentially balancing the books, not looking at any other options, not moving from their fiscal rules that they have set themselves, and balancing the books on the back of some of the most vulnerable members of society with their cuts to disability payments. People are telling us that. They are angry. They remember getting leaflets through at the general election in this constituency telling them that they would save £300 from their energy bills, and instead their energy bills have gone up 3 times. So that is what we're hearing on the doorstep. There's a real anger that people have been let down by Labour here, they've been let down by Labour nationally, and they're essentially, Scotland has been treated as an afterthought. Their views are being treated as an afterthought. And tellingly, the Labour candidate is absolutely silent on all of these issues.
You mentioned some of the decisions by the local Labour Council, but isn't it the case that local authorities like South Lanarkshire and across the country are having to make some deeply unpopular, difficult decisions due to chronic underfunding of local government by the SNP government?
So I've been a councillor since 2017 and times are difficult. There have been difficult decisions which have had to be made not only in our local authority but in local authorities across Scotland because of the reduction in funding from Westminster to the Scottish Government and the effects of that, and also all of the other things that the Scottish Government is having to mitigate, such as the 2-child cap, for example. But what it comes down to is a matter of choices. And I'm proud of my record on the council and standing up for my communities and for standing up for all of the communities in South Lanarkshire, because it's about choices, it's about decisions. So my background is in teaching, and that's always been the thing that has driven me, is making sure that children and families and young people get the support that they need to flourish. So in our alternative budget this year, we put forward a 10.3% increase to devolved school management budgets. And that was on the basis, in my role as the Leeds education within our group, which I've been doing since 2017, I've been out speaking to parents, teachers, pupil councils who are telling us they need extra funding for the basics, and they need that coming from the council. It's the council that is in charge of those devolved school budgets. They're getting extra funding from the Scottish Government via things like the pupil equity funding, which is very welcome and that's great, but they need that support from local government at the moment, and they've not been getting that. If we had been in a different situation with this year's budget, had it not been for the massive tax hike that the UK Labour government had put in place through the national employers' contributions, for example, and national insurance employers' contributions, we would have saved £15 million as a council. That's costing us £15 million before we even turn round. And we could have completely avoided any council tax rise in South Lanarkshire if we didn't have to account for what Labour had done.
Isn't it the case, though, if you look at the pressures on local government like South Lan, part of that is caused by years of council tax freezes by the SNP government, effectively taking away the flexibility of town halls to increase the tax? So, as you know, and it's under the fresh leadership of John Swinney, which we have now, it's the important thing that the Scottish Government need to do now is listen to what people are telling them, listen to what local authorities are telling them and people are telling them, and take action. The council tax freeze was the right thing to do at the time because it was supporting people through the cost of living crisis, which was 14 years of Tory austerity. You know all of that history, of course. It was the right thing to do at the time. I am the local government convener for my party. I really believe in the power of local government and the flexibility that local government should have, and that the Scottish Government has listened to local authorities. There's been a lot of very open and very honest discussion via COSLA. I sit on COSLA convention myself, and we have more freedom and flexibility now to think about that. But what it comes back to is, as I say, in South Lanarkshire, we would not have had to have a council tax rise at all. And our alternative budget was proposing investment like £1 million into community learning and development, which is covering classes for adults to help with literacy, numeracy, whole family support. That was the kind of choices which we were making. We would have been able to make more of those choices in an alternative budget and had no council tax rise whatsoever had it not been for this tax hike from the UK government. That's a choice which they have made, which is affecting every public service in Scotland. By-elections can be rough. Labour basically say that you're not a local candidate, that you've been parachuted into the constituency. What's your response to that? To be completely honest, I find some of it hilarious. It's been written by people that have no knowledge of my history, and I think perhaps if they were spending a little less time doing things like digging out my birth certificate to find out I was born in Irvine and they had just asked me, yeah, I was born in Irvine,
I've been married for nearly 20 years now. My husband's from Hamilton. I know this area extremely well. I have extremely close ties to it. I have family in Hamilton. It's a second home to me. You know, my children have grown up running up and down the slopes in Shattlero Park. It's a ridiculous statement to make. And I have also been in the council, as I say, since 2017. And I've had responsibility for education within my group. So I know the communities here really, really well. And it'd be an absolute honour to serve them. So if other people want to try and spin stories like that. I suppose the other thing I would say is this election is all about electing a champion for this community. We know about the sad circumstances in which this by-election has come about, obviously with the death of dear friend and colleague Christina. She was an amazing champion for all of the communities who make up this constituency and for all of Scotland as well. And when we've been out and about speaking to local organisations, charities, businesses, people on the doorsteps, that's been reflected back at us. Just the love that she had for this constituency, the ties that she had to this constituency. And she's been a tremendous role model to me the whole way through. I've also spoken to people who, some of the newer housing estates, so on the fringes of Hamilton and the fringes of Larkhall, for example, where people have lived here for 3 months. They've lived here for 4 months. I think the record was a gentleman who had moved 3 weeks previously before I chapped his door, and he was asking me about registering to vote, and we had that conversation. These are all people who live within this constituency, who deserve representation, and someone who's going to champion their issues and listen to them and deliver for them. I don't care if somebody's been here for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 days, whatever it is. I want to be here to represent all of them, regardless of where they were born or where they've come from. We're all from somewhere.
If you win the by-election, one of the big devolved issues that you're going to have to contend with is the NHS. Now, locally, there's lots of complaints and fears about the downgrade of the neonatal unit at Wishaw Hospital. Will you oppose that downgrade if you're the MSP?
So this issue for me, and I'm going to speak here as a parent as well, and from the heart, this issue is about making sure that the smallest and the sickest babies have the absolute best quality care. And what it comes down to, for me, I would crawl over hot coals for my children. I have worked with children and families and young people for my entire professional life, from the absolute beginning, in different capacities. And the one thing that has united every family I've spoken to is they want the absolute best for their child. It doesn't matter what their circumstances are, and they would do anything to make sure that would happen. And if they thought if their child was extremely ill, had health issues, which of course you see as a teacher as well, health issues that can follow a child for their life, and it's all about making sure that they get the support they need. People would fly to the moon if it was the best thing to do for their child. The staff in Wishaw do a fantastic job, an absolutely incredible job, and I would like to put on record my thanks to them. This is about a very small subset of families where their child is needing that extra support. And it's only for a temporary time. There is funding in place to make sure that they have absolutely everything that they need when their family is going through what is an incredibly difficult time for them, to help them with some of the practicalities about getting there and so on, to make sure their family feels supported. And of course it's about getting them back into their communities and back into a more local hospital for them. But fundamentally, the science, the experts, the medical research tells us the best outcomes for these children, which will affect them for the rest of their life, for these very small and sick babies, is to have them in a specialist centre. And as a parent, that's what I would want for my child.
So you for or against the downgrade?
It's not about being for or against the downgrade, it's about doing the best for those children. And if the research is telling us, I'm not a clinician, I've never been, and although in my family you're either a teacher or a nurse, that's the two paths we choose. I'm not a clinician, I'm not going to sit and make medical judgments. I will listen to the expertise of people who have made those medical judgments and who have advised the Scottish Government on what is the best thing to do here. The best thing to do is to have a specialist centre where the absolute, the best equipment, when you're dealing with something which is affecting such a small subset, then that's what I would want for my own child, and that's what I
Wouldn't a
believe other
local
people.
champion oppose the downgrade though, given the local resistance to it?
A local champion would make sure that families are supported in the best, to give the best outcomes for their children, and to make sure that they're supported and that they're back in their communities, they're back in their support network as soon as possible.
Let's just consider the SNP government's record in the NHS. We've got hundreds of thousands of people waiting for operations and treatments. Folk regularly complain that they can't get a speedy appointment with a GP. Well-documented problems in A&E and also social care. Isn't the SNP's record in the NHS just one of complete and utter failure?
So I'll tell you about some of the experiences I've had in the last few weeks speaking to people. So first of all, there are a lot of people who would like to tell positive stories about their experiences, but there are people who want to tell us about where things have gone wrong. It's my job, it's our job as the Scottish Government, as a party and as a local representative to listen to those experiences and take action on them. That's the bit that needs to change. We need to look at delivery. So to give you an example, beautiful sunny day yesterday, I was out with the First Minister and we were sitting on a garden wall speaking to a gentleman about his experience of trying to get a GP appointment. And he was telling us that he was watching breakfast TV in the morning and it was ticking up and it was 7:59 and he had to make the phone call at 8 o'clock. And I'd be laughing saying, well, I've got an extra half hour in my bed, mine is 8:30. But the serious point of that is that's not good enough. You know, something needs to change there. So that's why I think it's absolutely fantastic news that the Scottish Government, John Swinney, has listened to that and we're delivering an extra 100,000 GP appointments to avoid that rush. That's part of the solution, but also part of listening to people's experiences of it is to work out what else can be going on, what else can be improving. Also had a conversation with a gentleman earlier in the week who was a paramedic, and he was talking about his experiences of patient flow through various hospitals, and he was saying that in his opinion a key part of that is getting the first bit right. It's getting primary care right, and it's getting so that people are not in a situation where they're phoning an ambulance where there's maybe another service that would be more appropriate for them because of the issues that he's seeing that's caused. So he was really interested to hear about, for example, that investment into primary care, which will have an effect through the whole system. And we were also speaking about pharmacy first, as well as an option to make sure that people can access care quickly, where it's maybe more appropriate to be seen by a pharmacist or it's more appropriate to be seen by a nurse as a first point of contact, and then if any other referral needs to be made beyond that. And I was talking about my own experience. I have rather unfortunately seemed to develop an allergy to red wine or some red wine, not ideal during a campaign, and I'm having slightly strange allergic reactions. Saw a wonderful pharmacist who said, right, try this, take these antihistamines, use it. Absolutely fantastic. I didn't take up a GP appointment. That was the most appropriate person to speak to, and she was wonderful and managed to help me. In terms of waiting times, again, it's something that the Scottish Government have listened to people about and are taking action. So we're looking at, there's been funding which is put in place to offer an extra 150,000 appointments to bring those waiting times down, because they're not good enough just now. So it's the responsible thing to do as a government, to listen to what people are telling us and to make sure we take action on that, because it's all about delivery. And the Scottish Government under John Swinney's fresh leadership is about making sure people are seeing that outcome. And we do have a way to go, but progress is being made, and I'm very proud to be standing for a party where that progress is being made. What we're not hearing are any details from Labour. I know that this morning, for example, we had Lord Hawkey, who's a very well-known figure locally, pointing to the fact that there's nothing positive from the UK Labour budget. He can point at no positive action. We've got, I will not name them, so I don't know how public this is, although I do believe it was on X, local councillors in South Lanarkshire, Labour councillors, who are saying that they cannot point to a single positive action that Labour are taking which would improve the NHS. And that's a worry. It's also a worry that we are not hearing anything at all on any of these issues from the Labour candidate.
But it's the SNP that have been in power for 18 years. Do you not think that the Scottish Government owe people in this constituency an apology for the state of the National Health Service?
As I said, I think the important thing, we are out having, I've currently got 3 pairs of trainers in slightly different colours, Paul, that I'm wearing down to the ground at the moment, because the important bit to me and to John Swinney and to the Scottish Government is getting out and listening to people. That's what we need to do. I've just told you about several of them, some fantastic conversations with people. We need to keep that up. And then we need to say to people, we are listening to you, we're listening to your concerns, and we're taking action. And that's about the 100,000 extra GP appointments. That's about the 150,000 procedures and appointments that are going to be put in place. To listen to people's concerns, acknowledge them, and take action.
You mentioned your professional career as a teacher.
Yes.
I think it's almost a decade since Nicola Sturgeon made her famous speech in which she said that she wanted to close the attainment gap completely. Clearly that's not happened 10 years later. Why is that the case? And given that she said it was her #1 priority, the attainment gap is still wide, still persists. Is that not another huge failure of the Scottish Government?
It's an extremely difficult thing to untangle. You're right, I taught for about 10 years, so I know from personal experience all of the factors that play into that and are extremely difficult to untangle. We are making progress. We're making good progress in South Lanarkshire, and that is thanks to the dedication and the commitment of our teaching staff and the support staff and all of the staff in schools who are making that a reality for young
the
people.
local council as well, if education's a council matter? Would that not be a matter
I've already shared my opinions on some of the decisions that the Labour administration are taking and are currently taking, and we're about to see the ramifications of the 8,000 pupils about to lose their access to free school transport, which means they're going to be walking up to an hour, potentially beautiful Scottish weather, pouring rain, slippery roads, carrying trombones, math textbooks, whatever it is. I don't think that's conducive to people coming in and being ready to learn at all. So no, I'm very critical of some of the decisions they're taking, but I'm proud of my record when I was the Chair of Education here for 5 years, and some of the things which we put in place, which were about supporting young people. The attainment gap is closing. This is an extremely difficult task. It's a task...
Snail's pace, though.
It's an extremely difficult task because there's lots of factors to untangle. And not all of it is about what happens in the classroom. A lot of it is about what else is happening in people's lives. So again, from my experience and from my family that are teachers, from my friends that are teachers, if you've got kids coming in where they are worried about what they've had to eat in the morning or what they've not had to eat in the morning or whether their mum's had anything to eat, what their family situation is like, and precarious living situations, or all sorts of things can feed into how ready a child is to learn. We've had 14 years of austerity under the Tory government. I've already spoken about how Labour are choosing to act in government at the moment. Their refusal to remove the 2-child cap, for example, an absolutely abhorrent piece of legislation that are keeping people in this constituency and across Scotland in poverty. These are the types of things which the Scottish Government is having to mitigate against constantly. These are the types of issues that are affecting families. We can do some fantastic targeted work, and I think the difference in terms of when I first began teaching, first had an interest in education, to where we are now, we have a much greater understanding of how all of that affects children, young people and families, and we're much more data driven as well. So I can tell you about some of the work that's been going on within the Scottish Government, that's been going on within the regional educational collaboratives as well, to really drill down into that data and see exactly where the points are, where there is improvement, and where we need to put in that wee bit of extra support.
The gap hasn't been closed though, has it? It's not even nearly closed.
The gap is closing, and schools have got much more flexibility than they used to as well, which is something I really welcome. So through things like pupil equity funding from the Scottish Government, that's really given individual schools and head teachers and teachers and support staff who understand their communities best, who know exactly what it is they need to make that difference. So maybe it's an issue with primary 4 reading. So there's something happening in this one particular school about primary 4 reading. So what do we need to do? We need to put in a reading recovery programme here in this school which they have the flexibility. They don't need permission from the council, they don't need permission from on high. They know what's best for their schools, and thanks to the Scottish Government policies, they have the flexibility and the freedom to do that. And there's all sorts of fantastic work that's going on in pockets in South Lanarkshire, in individual schools, in learning communities, which has then been shared with other learning communities, which again is a development that I'm really pleased to see, that the environment has opened up. It's changed, so there is that better communication between schools about what's working here. And those are the conversations we need to have. It's difficult. It's really, really difficult work, but it's really important work. And we've made progress on it, and we're going to continue to make progress on it, and I'm really proud of that.
Do you support a ban on smartphones in classrooms?
So I've got teenagers just now. So they have, I've got a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they have very strong opinions on that. What I will say as a parent's point of view, it was really important to me that their school had a very open dialogue, which was with the parent council, it was with parents, we were all emailed and asked to share our opinions, but most importantly with the young people themselves. My children know perfectly well that why I maybe say some of the things I do about how much time they're spending on their smartphones. You know, they understand that, they understand that. And I think there's an interesting balance to be struck, because they also use their smartphones in some lessons in ways which technology, I'm not going to reveal my age, but let's say it didn't exist, you know, in the same way when I was at high school myself, and it was a very different environment. But they sometimes, so they might do a little quiz in the classroom, and they're using their smartphone to access another service. So that's interesting. And teachers, it's one of these professions where you've always got to move with the times, and teachers are very resilient and adaptable and can work things like that in to meet young people on their level. But there have very much, there definitely have been problems with their disruptive use.
So why not just support a ban then?
Because I think it's a decision that needs to be made in collaboration with young people. We've got a much better understanding now of how the fact that young people should be partners in their learning. They should be involved in their learning, and they should be involved in decisions about their learning. Different things work for different schools. So you'll have seen on the news these unlocking devices which are on the walls in some schools in Edinburgh. That's working well for them, and in consultation with their parents and their young people. The school which my children attend, it's a plastic box. I remember speaking to a member of the parent council about it, and it was like, yeah, that costs £3, and it sits on every teacher's desk. And it's now, right, put your phone away. Right, your phone's not away, it goes in the box. And it really has not been a big deal. But different solutions suit different schools. It depends very much on the layout of the school, the relationships between the staff, the pupils, the parents. I think it's more complicated than that. But fundamentally,
do you think it comes down to it should be the decision of the individual head teacher rather than supporting a national ban?
I think it needs to be, the key for me is it needs to be a solution, because there is very much a problem which needs to be addressed. It needs to be a solution which is worked through in conjunction with the parents and the young people, so that the young people understand why the decision has been made, because that's how we bring young people with us. And that's the kind of atmosphere and ethos we want to create in our schools.
Let's imagine you get elected next month and the Scottish Government brings forward a proposal that you don't agree with. Would you be willing to vote against an SNP government at Holyrood?
I'm struggling to think of an example of it. Perhaps if you've got one. I'm very proud to be a member of SNP. We have of this party, the SNP, we have very robust internal debate and dialogue at conference, which I'm really looking forward to this year's conference as well. Our policies come from our members. They come from the grassroots, they come from our members, and they come after very often protracted discussion.
But sometimes, you know, things happen and the government needs to take decisions quickly,
sure,
maybe over the heads of party conference. So I'm just wondering, in principle, would you be willing to vote against your government if you felt strongly that they were making the wrong choice on something?
So, as I said earlier, I've been a councillor since 2017, and there have been positions which I've had to argue very firmly within my group, which other people didn't necessarily believe or agree with. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose those discussions. But if I was elected to represent this community, the interests of this community come first, and I will have those difficult discussions within my group as sort of a party of democracy, and make the point very strongly. And if you make those arguments, but it's devoting the time, and as I say, I've done that within my council group. It's devoting the time to make those arguments and say, here's why. This is why I want to speak about this.
Just a few final questions. What do you make of the Supreme Court judgment in relation to biological sex?
Yeah, but we've got to respect the judgment that they have made on the rule of law.
I think some people in the SNP are worried about the EHRC guidance on the back of the Supreme Court judgment. Nicola Sturgeon said that she feared that the lives of trans people would be almost unlivable. Is that a fear that you share?
Listen, I understand that, and ultimately I am standing to represent everybody in this constituency, and to support and protect the rights of everyone in this constituency. And I understand that particularly amongst members of the trans community, there is a lot of fear and alarm. And over the coming weeks and months, the Scottish Government are going to have to look very carefully at the ramifications of those guidelines which you've referred to, and of the Supreme Court ruling, to make sure that we're getting it right for everybody.
You've called for a BBC debate amongst the candidates. Do you think that's going to happen? Why do you think there seems to be a bit of resistance to that?
There does seem to be a bit of resistance, which and I'm not talking from the BBC's point of view necessarily, although their editorial decisions are theirs to make. I think it's more interesting more generally in this by-election is the silence from the Labour candidate on many important issues. When he is standing for election in this constituency, it is incumbent on him to tell the people of this constituency what his views are on many of the important issues of the day. I referred to Lord Hawkey earlier, talking about not a single positive thing to point at in the UK Labour government, to talk about his concern about the effects on local businesses of the changes in national insurance contributions, what is effectively a tax hike, and to talk about his concerns about the UK, about Labour's decisions on cuts to disability benefits. I've not heard a single word from the Labour candidate on any of these topics. We've heard what Starmer has got to say, and we've heard what donors like Lord Hawkey have got to say. So my question to my Labour opponent would be, does he agree with Starmer, or does he agree with Lord Hawkey? Does he agree with what we are hearing on the doors, the concerns of people in this constituency about the winter fuel payment, about WASPy women and the lack of compensation, about the two-child cap, I could go on. All of these issues, not hearing anything from them. I was at Hustings last night, and he didn't make an appearance, and I was really disappointed by that. I know that people in the room were as well.
Do you think that the Labour candidate is running scared of a BBC candidates debate?
That might be an assumption that other people would make. I haven't spoken to him directly, but it's interesting to watch. We'll see what happens. I've made my position very clear. I think when you're standing to elect a community, to be elected by a community, that community should have the right to ask you the difficult questions and to hear your views on them.
Final question. You're obviously the candidate in Rutherglen. I would imagine that was quite a bruising experience given the result. What would you say that you learned from that campaign? You learn something from every campaign. I've been a member of the SNP now since 2014. I was one of the post-Indie Ref members. I thoroughly enjoy getting out and speaking to people. I've been elected twice now, been lucky enough to be elected twice to council from 2017, and it's an absolute honour and a privilege to do it. But most importantly, getting out and speaking to people. And that's a really important priority to me between campaigns as well as during campaigns. I'm a big fan of street surgeries, where the MSPs, councillors, parliamentarians, activists all get out together. It's not party political. We're just out to chap doors and speak to people and say, right, what's going on? Here's our contact details. What can we do to help you? And that's something that, if I'm lucky enough to be elected in MSP in this election, I'd want to keep going. That's important to me, and it's important to people as well. You're not tarnished by past defeats?
as I say, I've won 2 elections. I'm concentrating fully on this election just now. Very different circumstances. You know about the tragic circumstances this by-election is being held in just now. Completely different set of circumstances. Things have changed. People are feeling let down by what has happened. I've spoken to multiple people now who lent Labour their vote in the general election because they thought that this was a last roll of the dice. Let's see what happens. And they have been very, very badly let down, and they are extremely disappointed by the decisions that Labour have taken with a little bit of power. And we've seen that in South Lanarkshire as well. So very different circumstances.
Katy Loudon, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.